Time to break down the latest Florida State recruiting news.
You are Locked On Seminoles, your daily podcast on the Florida State Seminoles. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into Locked On Seminoles. I am your host, Brian Smith, longtime recruiting analyst and college football writer. Thank you for making Locked On Seminoles your first listen each and every day. Truly appreciate you stopping in to talk some Noles with me. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start this season with a big return on FanDuel, as customers can place a $5 bet and get started with $150 in bonus bets if that first $5 bet hits. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Today is about information regarding Florida State's recruiting, with the subtext being there's a lot of rivalry games actually getting started Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, and then on to the weekend on Sunday that will impact not only Florida State's recruiting directly, but will also impact Florida State's assistant coaching search and potentially long-term their head coaching search. So that's going to be the second part. But again, we're going to talk recruiting. So I'm going to go over the players that are committed, a little bit of information and background on what's been gleaned, and some experience from the historical perspective on what I think is going to happen on signing day. So just going to kind of go down the list here. Nothing shocking, not anything overwhelmingly newsworthy that you may or may not have heard, but there are a couple of things that I was personally a little bit surprised by. Maybe you will, maybe you won't. Number one, Chroma, the running back out of Georgia, who's been all over the map in terms of where he's going to end up. One point he was winning to Florida State. One point people thought it was Auburn. Committed to Georgia at one point. He was going to visit Ole Miss this weekend. That's not going to happen. Florida State's trying to get him to visit. I have no idea where this kid's going. He's a great young man. I've talked to him several times, but it's really hard to follow his recruitment. He's at Lee County High School in Georgia, elite prospect. He is one of the most difficult ball carriers to bring to the ground in the country. Tremendous hands, will block. Yes, sir, no, sir. He is 100% what you're looking for in a college football player. I have lost my mind trying to figure out where he's going, and a few of my friends are the same way. We're just kind of waiting. When he signs with somebody on signing day, that's when I'll know, and that's when everybody else will know. But this has been a top target for the Noles for a long time. Lee County is one of the best programs in the South, and he's well coached. And again, he's been brought up right. A new name is one that I haven't even had a chance to watch film on, a receiver out of Texas, big kid, 6'4", around 200 pounds. His name is Terry Shelton, plays at Ranch View in Carrollton, which is basically Dallas. And this is an area that's just blown up with the receivers in the last few years. He is originally an Arizona commitment, now is committed to TCU, and the Noles just offered him. I got this off of 24/7 Noles. They do a tremendous job of covering Florida State recruiting. If you haven't checked them out, please do. Where I go for my info, I think they do great. But I found it interesting. I'm like, okay, who's this kid? I hadn't seen that on Twitter or X, as I should say, but 6'4" guys catch my attention. And I know Norvell's staff has always coveted bigger receivers. Maybe that's your future boundary receiver if you can flip him from TCU. It's pretty interesting. Peyton Joseph. This is the one. I found this out through a friend of mine, and I looked into it a little bit. This one's a little iffy. Peyton was originally committed to Georgia. He ended up Florida, decommitted, ends up with the Noles. I don't know what's going to happen, but he's recently visited Georgia Tech. Things could be trending towards him going to Atlanta to play college football. But here's the interesting thing. Looking into Georgia Tech's class, they already have 5 offensive linemen committed. Now, Brent Key does a great job with offensive linemen, but how many you got to sign? I don't know if that's going to impact him that much or not, but I found that intriguing. It's closer to home for him, maybe, slightly, but the distance from where he's at to Tallahassee is not a whole bunch of difference to Atlanta. Maybe a half hour one way or the other. So I don't think that's a huge difference for him because he's in the middle of the state of Georgia. But the Warner Robins prospect is one that Florida State would do well to keep. Power player, interior offensive lineman. Florida State desperately needs all 5 spots, to be honest. This is a talented young man. He had offers from numerous programs. If they do not keep him, whether it's Georgia Tech or otherwise, that is a loss. Speaking of offensive linemen, I have mentioned multiple times in the last week or so that I was very leery of Solomon Thomas ending up at Florida State. He had a very good relationship with Alex Atkins, the offensive line coach and offensive coordinator formerly. And that's really hurt Florida State, just the way it is. Florida State is still after him, don't get me wrong, but so is LSU. And more notably, take a wild guess, Florida. Right now, there's a pretty good chance that I think he ends up there, but he's allegedly going to be looking at LSU as well. I don't know where that factors in. I'd imagine that Florida's still the team to watch because it's the closest to him, and it's a school that he's flirted with for a long time, probably more than anybody else outside of Florida State. There is the rumor that Alex Atkins is also going to end up on staff at Florida. I cannot confirm that, but I have heard it. If that does come to fruition, make no mistake. Number one, he has a show clause, so he can't just go to another school and coach on field, but they can put him in the back office. That's what I've heard would happen. It'd be a smart move by Atkins. He'd get paid. He'd stay in the industry, keep his contacts going. It is what it is. But as I've said on this show a million times, players pick coaches, not schools. If Atkins goes to Florida, I would not be surprised if multiple kids ended up at Florida that he recruited. They already got one, Pierre Lewis. Thomas could be another, but it is what it is. He's a great player, maybe the best interior offensive line recruit in the country, but you can't change where a coach is at. They got rid of him. Atkins had done a terrible job, so we'll see. Next, speaking again of offensive linemen, it sounds like Mario Nash, based on the interview 24/7 Noles did, is pretty much locked in. I don't know the specifics, but the assistant O-line coach at Florida State has done a really good job. And on top of that, I think it's interesting, Gabe Pertita, I think it's interesting that that's happened. Maybe that gives Gabe a chance to at least be co-O-line coach or move up, and good for him. If you're not a good recruiter, you're not going to make it as an O-line coach or any other position anyway. Mario likes it. From interviewing and actually doing a pod with him on this very channel, Mario is a no-nonsense, blue-collar kind of kid. You're not going to fool him. So Gabe's done a good job in helping keeping him committed to the Noles, and that's awesome. I think Nash can be a left tackle long-term. I've seen him play live. That is a very athletic young man. I highly doubt he would struggle to make the transition to college because he's so motivated to go along with his size and natural athleticism. Very good player. Wouldn't be surprised if he played next year for Florida State. Even though that'd be a little early, he has the physical tools to do so. Moving to the secondary, a kid that I haven't heard specifics about in the last couple of days, but Mississippi State's a visit that's coming up. There are some other schools kicking around. Illinois, I know, is one. Max Redmond, the DB out of South Florida. If he comes back this weekend, I'll feel a little better. He might be coming for the UF game. We'll see if he does. But if he does not, that's a problem. He's, again, defensive back from South Florida, really good player, and his kid's been committed to Florida State for a long time. That would hurt to lose him. Next, looking at the group overall, I expect Zay Thomas, the DB out of American Heritage, to stick. Chase Lofton probably going to stick. He's buddies with the quarterback that just committed to Florida State, so that certainly helps. And there's also a few other possibilities as well, but right now, like the Desir twins, we'll stick with Florida State. I'm going to make a little prediction here. Like they got a quarterback out of the blue, like the Desir twins committed out of the blue, there's going to be 2 or 3 more guys, maybe players I've heard of, maybe you've heard of them, that'll end up signing with Florida State 1 week from today. I have no idea which players will sign. It'll just be something random. Kids they've offered maybe a while back, maybe they offered in the last 2 weeks. Recruiting this year, especially because there are no in-home visits, makes it extremely difficult to project. The in-home visits were always the final clue on where kids were going. We don't get those this year as recruiting analysts to make projections. It is going to be wild. So it's much, much more difficult to predict because signing day is December 4th instead of in the middle of the month of December or even December 20th, I believe it was last year. There are no in-homes. It is what it is. When we come back, I'm going to talk about the second tier of this show, which is the importance of all the rivalry games and why coaching changes could happen out of that impact Florida State, as well as recruiting changes. That's coming up next here on Locked On Seminoles. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can place $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the National Football League, all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, live by play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the National Football League. It is rivalry week. Florida State's got Florida this weekend. Certainly talks quite a bit about the Gators and the Noles. Thank you to all of you that have come out and watched the podcast this week. I truly appreciate you stopping in to make this your first listen each and every day. But not just Florida State. There's so many good rivalries this week, and they will have a lot of impact on Florida State, primarily in two ways. Recruiting. Kids make decisions based on where coaches are. So when guys get fired or they move on, their decisions change. There will be rumors immediately after games about coaches going to here, coaches going there. Some will do it before signing day. Some will do it after. Regardless, it will impact where recruits sign. Again, recruits pick coaches, not schools. That's just the way it works. You can be mad about it, hate it, think it's going to change. It's not. That's how it works. That being stated, Florida State's already made their major moves. And with that, here are a few games that I think will impact them in some way, shape, or form, mixed in with just some fun predictions and thoughts about games. Starting off at the top, here's an interesting game because it has so many different possible outcomes for not only what's going to happen in their conference, but what could happen with coaching. Oklahoma State plays at Colorado. And Oklahoma State's terrible. 3-8. I thought they had a chance to make the playoff this year. They've lost 8 in a row. But Malachi Smith, the freshman quarterback, finally got his chance to play last week and tore it up. So should we think that all of a sudden they've got a chance? I mean, that might be a little much to think, but then again, it's a 16.5-point line. Colorado's favored on FanDuel. But maybe if Colorado overlooks them, they certainly overlooked Kansas and got smacked. I think they're going to rally and win this game. But Malachi Smith's pretty good. And Ollie Gordon still resides in Stillwater. That's a really good football player. He had 150-some yards last week. And he's got a chance to go over 1,000 again with a good game against the Buffaloes, who just got ran over by Kansas. This could be an interesting game. I'm not a gambler per se, but I would lay the points if I was going to be in the betting mark for this game because they found a quarterback. Oklahoma State, though, again, I would not bet them like money line or something. 16.5 points is for a reason. They still lost 8 in a row. Their defense sucks. So with that being stated, here's the other part. Well, if they get fired at that, I guess, a staff, because, they've lost 8 in a row. If they lose, especially if they lose bad, does Oklahoma State act on that? And the coaching door kind of opens up in the Big 12 because, like him or not, Gundy's a long tenured coach. He's got assistants under him that have a lot of experience. They could trickle out. They could either end up at Florida State, end up at a rival for other coaches that, okay, they get their guy from OSU, but now somebody else here are both going after Florida State and another school, let's say LSU. They're already out of the market. They got a guy. So this is where the coaching carousel really gets going. Would not be surprised if there are several different coaches on that Oklahoma State staff that are gone for one reason or another. And it works the other way. Colorado's had success this year. If they win this game and they somehow end up in the Big 12 title game, that's a mess. I'm not sure how the tiebreakers work. You could see assistants from Colorado go different places. Maybe one of them ends up at Florida State. Would not be surprising. And then, of course, how does Deion handle adversity in his locker room? Because he called out his guys, and rightfully so. He said they were getting too familiar with the press clippings and all that after the game against Kansas. This is a really important moment. If he's ever going to end up at Florida State, one of the things you need to evaluate, how does he handle adversity with his team? It's not easy. It's really hard to get 18 to 22-year-olds to stay on an even plane. It's almost impossible from week to week. Last week, Colorado got smacked by a team in Kansas that wanted it more, was more physical, and just flat out ran over it. Can Colorado get back to being a physical team at the line of scrimmage? I want to see that this week. Next, Minnesota, Wisconsin. Wisconsin fired their offensive coordinator. From talking to Ryan Herrings over at Locked On Badgers, I don't think they're going to spend like they need to. They could be after the same coaches that Florida State is. Very possible. But Wisconsin is notoriously cheap for a program that tries to, we're on the up and coming and all this. Cheap. You have to overpay if you're Wisconsin because not many people want to live there so far north. And B, how much talent are you going to get there if you're an offensive coordinator? How many receivers, etc.? I'm curious to see what they do this week, if they show anything different. I have to think they're going to struggle to get what they need regardless if they have the money. But if they don't show they're going to try some different things right now, it's not going to help whoever they're trying to lure to Madison. Maybe I'm wrong. I think Minnesota is a good team, but they also choked with terrible play calls down the stretch against Penn State and losing 26-25. I like Wisconsin to win the game. But Minnesota's better overall. I just think they'll be flat. Could be wrong. Speaking of flat, Mississippi State at Ole Miss. Ole Miss has got some pretty good coaches on their staff, so I wouldn't be surprised if somebody wanted to leave Lane's staff, ended up at Florida State for a chance. But Mississippi State has nothing to lose. Ole Miss just choked its season away last week at Florida. Could we see an upset? Could we see some coaching maneuvers? Could we see recruits decommit from Ole Miss? All kinds of possibilities there. Ole Miss should win because they're a bazillion times better than Mississippi State. But I would not be surprised if the Bulldogs hung around a little bit with the Rebs. Curious to see what the boosters at Ole Miss think, how that goes with the coaches. And again, it's at Ole Miss. Which recruits show up, who does and does not show up. I'm sure they're going to try to get guys like Mario Nash to go visit or whoever. It's a big game for Florida State on the outskirts because there could be a coach or two involved in this game that's not at those schools next year. This is my favorite one out of this entire list coming up right here. Georgia Tech at Georgia. Normally, with rivalry games, you can say, Brian, so-and-so's playing this team this next week or whatever. It's their annual rivalry game. Who's home and home? I can almost tell you because I follow them so close. But Georgia beats the crap out of Georgia Tech almost every year. I didn't even know. I don't remember the last time they lost to GT. But now that Brent Key's there, he's a good coach, obviously. Things are starting to turn. There are multiple coaches on Georgia Tech staff. I guarantee you that not only Florida State might be interested in, numerous other schools might too. I think that's important. And I also think something else very, very noticeable about this. Georgia Tech's trying to sniff around some recruits like Peyton Joseph that FSU has. If they go out, especially if they beat Georgia, but if they play really well in Sanford Stadium and they lose by like 6, it was pretty competitive last year. Caught them a little bit by surprise. Georgia Tech's not sneaking up on anybody this year. Georgia better be ready. And they should be. Georgia Tech's improved. It's been consistent this year. And that I think you could see Georgia Tech, not just with the kids that are trying to snatch from Florida State, but anybody better be careful with Georgia Tech on the recruiting trail. And again, if they do well, maybe one of their assistants ends up being a coordinator, maybe Florida State, someplace else. By the way, there's a certain coach on that staff that is a former Heisman winner at Florida State. Look that up. That could be somebody down the road. Next, Michigan at Ohio State. I think Ohio State's going to stomp them. Right off the bat, before anybody talks about it, I heard somebody else say this on the pod. Oh, Michigan, they got it. Michigan is getting stomped. If Indiana, with a much better quarterback than what Michigan's got, can't move the ball, what do you think Michigan's going to do against Ohio State? That's going to be like 31-7. Ohio State will just be running out the clock from the beginning of the fourth quarter on. That game will be very, very one-sided. That being stated, again, everybody's going to be trying to come after Ohio State's coaches. Curious if anybody leaves. They've had a great year. Hats off to the Buckeyes. I have no idea which ones. It's not just the obvious receiver coach. That's a really good step. Chip Kelly is there. Does he want to go back to being a head coach? I doubt it. That's going to be interesting as well. Ohio State's got a really expensive coaching staff. Somebody might be moving up the board there. Tennessee at Vandy. This one's kind of interesting. This is probably my second favorite. Georgia Tech's my fave, but what if Vanderbilt beat Tennessee? Number one, that changes the college football playoff. 2, it'd be hilarious because they have way more talent in Knoxville. That's not any newsflash. But I've seen Diego Pavia play. live. He's just a gamer. He finds a way to make the critical pass or the critical run and make the game very interesting. Tennessee screws around, especially if they put the ball on the ground, maybe a return for a touchdown by Vanderbilt, whatever it may be. That would be hilarious. Also, I think Clark Lea's staff at Vandy has done a great job. I would be quite disappointed if Florida State didn't at least entertain looking at their back office, looking at their up-and-coming GAs. Everybody on their staff should be evaluated. It is almost impossible to win at Vandy because of their academic standards and, quite honestly, that institution turning its nose up at a brutal sport like football. It's just true. They really hover around the Olympic sports, baseball, and women's sports, etc., for their mainstay. They've had some pretty good men's basketball teams too, but by and large, Vandy is not a very good football program. Even this year, they've improved, but they're still not great. But they also beat Bama this year, so they can rise up in a game. It'll be fascinating to see what happens with this. And by the way, I'm kind of rooting for them to beat Tennessee because, again, I just think it'd be hilarious. Next, South Carolina at Clemson. This game is probably the most difficult one on this entire slate that I have, just to pick a winner. I don't know who's going to win, but I guarantee you people are going to be interested in South Carolina staff because that's another place, kind of like Vandy, that just doesn't win much. Now, the academic standards are different. If you've got football talent, they will take you. They don't care. I know they're not going to like me saying this, but they'll take anybody at South Carolina, okay? That being stated, that coaching staff's done a heck of a job. There could be some possibilities there that end up moving on. Would not be surprised. Again, back office, assistant coach, offensive coordinator, defense. There could be something in conjunction with that with Florida State. I find that game very interesting. I really don't know who's going to win. It's at Clemson. Might be the best game of the weekend just from an aesthetics point of view. And again, recruiting with this, there's so many kids. I'm sure both those schools are trying to steal some of Florida State's recruits. Watch out for both of them down the stretch. They've both been playing good. So again, if I can only watch one game this weekend, it'd probably be the Gamecocks playing out the Tigers. It's just from an aesthetics standpoint. I don't like either team per se, but at the same time, I respect good football. They're both playing it. When we come back, I'm going to finish up this list and come back also with a couple other parting recruiting shots. That's next on Locked On Seminoles. Florida State has the Florida Gators at home this weekend, but to finish out some of the interesting slate, here's a game that I think is really, really interesting. Louisville at Kentucky. There are a lot of boosters at Kentucky that aren't very happy. I think they forget they're Kentucky. Don't get me started on that. And Louisville's got the capability of scoring. Which Kentucky team shows up? Does Stoops end up at Kentucky after this year? Remember now, he was DC at Florida State at one point. Before anybody asks, no, he's not coming to Florida State to be the DC. Would be floored. He's only going to take head coaching gigs. Get mad, scream, whatever. That ain't going to happen. But that being the case, he's got guys on his staff that are good, and he could probably be a good resource for Florida State to utilize to get into the back end of this and help negotiate some of these assistant, like, hey, you guys need to go get this guy. No, don't take that one, take this one. Those are the backdoor kind of conversations that I've had with coaches about, like, man, this guy's got a rep, but he's a jerk. He won't fit in there, blah, blah, blah. A guy like Stoops would be very, very wise to contact if you're Florida State, even if you have no interest in him coming. He's been around the profession a long time. Obviously, his family's famous in college football, and he's been at Florida State. Why not at least discuss that with him? Do not be surprised if Louisville wins that game and wins going away. I'm not sure Kentucky's players, even though it's a rival, will come out with a vengeance against Louisville. But I'm also not sure about Louisville, too, because that team is absolutely up and down. I don't think Braum has done his best coaching job this year. And quite frankly, I think they've got too many mercenaries on that team. We're going to talk about that in an upcoming podcast, maybe even on Thanksgiving here at Locked On Seminoles. Florida State needs to get away from the portal, and Louisville really needs to get away from the portal. Duke at Wake Forest. I'm just going to make this very short. I'd care less about the game, but hats off to Duke this year. They're 8-3. That's pretty hard to do. Manny Diaz has done a great job. Anybody on his staff, especially on defense, that you can talk to, again, resources. Who should we be looking for DC? Anybody in the back office? All that stuff comes into play. I'm not out of the realm. Like if you went the quote unquote co-DC role, for instance, Surtain's passing game coordinator and whoever the best run defensive guy is on Duke staff, if you could hire him to Florida State, it'd be hard to go against it. Duke does not recruit at the same level Florida State does. I'm being kind, yet they have better results. They're understanding who they can sign, how to develop them, and above all else, game day, they maximize because they don't have the same depth. You need to contact that staff. They do a very good job. This one is interesting, I think, more than anything else, is because it's the longest standing intersectional rivalry. Both staffs have some pretty good coaches, but it's more for fun here. Notre Dame at Southern Cal. Obviously, Notre Dame is very good. Southern Cal is iffy. They are the team that just can't get out of their own way in close games. They've lost every game by like a single score this year. Bizarre. I think Notre Dame's favored by around a touchdown, which I think is a little light. But again, USC hangs around in all the games. Could there be carnage, especially from USC staff, if they lose to the Irish, which I expect they will? Possibly. Not so sure if Florida State would want any of them, although it could be a possibility. More importantly, I'm just going to kind of throw this out there. There are multiple guys on Notre Dame's staff, offense and defense, because they've just been mowing people down. I know their schedule's not that great, but you at least need to entertain it. They play a very physical brand of football that never goes out of style. Florida State should once again, like, call it Marcus Freeman. I know they're not going to get Al Golden like to come be the DC at Florida. Why would he leave Notre Dame? He's got arguably the best defense in the country there. But you can't lose anything by asking, hey, who are some assistants? And I would not be surprised if one of the position coaches on Notre Dame's defense would, again, like co-coordinator or something. It's certainly possible. You have nothing to lose. Finally, the one that I know Florida State fans are interested in for the obvious reason, Miami goes to the Dome to play Syracuse. Yes, there is a possibility Miami could lose. No question. I think they will win, but Miami, since they were good in the early 2000s, has never won an ACC title. Why? They get in their own way. They've done it every year since then, literally. Why would this year be any different? I expect them to either lose to Syracuse or lose to SMU, maybe both. Bottom line, I don't know how that game is going to go, but obviously Nicholson, just got to mention him, is on the staff at Miami. I don't think he's going to leave. He's the linebacker coach, but he played for the Noles. Maybe that's a possibility there. I wouldn't be shocked if there's some kind of recruiting ramifications too. Syracuse has done a good job of coming down Florida, Georgia, and getting players. Fran Brown's done a great job. If Miami stomps them, at least from that perspective, it might be good for Florida State. But just wanted to mention. More importantly, though, again, curious what Nicholson does long term. I'm not sure which guys on Florida State staff, plus the 3 are already gone, will be on the staff next year. I don't know if they're going to have any more staff changes, but Nicholson would be somebody you'd have to entertain if you had an opening of any kind. And again, is it out of the question he could be co-coordinator like with Surtain or something? I think it's possible. If you're going to entice somebody when your program is down, those are the kinds of moves you have to consider. We'll see what happens with that. Finally, one last thing about recruiting. I say this all the time, and I will say it one more. Follow the visits. If Florida State or anybody else is going to land a prospect, especially down the stretch, a kid that's committed to you, a kid that's on the fence between a couple of schools, and he is scheduled to come to your home finale for senior day against an arch rival like UF, and they don't show up, and it's just the opposite too. If you get a kid in for a visit and you didn't really expect him, at least from the public's eye, that Florida State might have known, it's just the opposite, and it looks good for Florida State. Follow the visits. That never changes. Let's see who shows up at Doak Campbell Stadium when they take on the Gators. Thank you once again for making Locked On Seminoles your first listen each and every day. I truly appreciate you stopping in to talk some Noles with me. You can find me on X at FBScout_Florida. That's FBScout_Florida. Please give me a follow and hit that notification bell, that like button, subscribe to this channel if you have not already. Share it and comment. Curious to hear what you had to say about the predictions for this weekend. It's going to be a lot of fun for the rivalry games, Florida State included. It's going to be a lot of fun right after with signing day next week. I'm going to have all kinds of recruiting stuff, not just FSU, but across the ACC, across the country, talking about coaches, all of that over the next several days. This channel is going to be jam-packed. And yes, I will have a podcast on Thanksgiving. See you all tomorrow. Take care.